Right. Welcome to Changing Minds, Changing Lives, kicking off our 2025. I am so excited to be here, so excited to be back, so energized right now with everything that's happening in the world. And before we bring on our amazing guest this week, Grant Harris, I'm so excited to introduce all of you, or potentially reintroduce all of you to. I just want to take a couple minutes and talk about my transition, my successor, why I chose to move into a new role with Disability Solutions, and what you all can expect from me and from the team in 2025. So I guess I hopped right in, didn't I? So welcome to Changing Minds, Changing Lives. My name is Julie Sowash. I am no longer the executive director of Disability Solutions, but as of January, I stepped into a new role with the team as founder and strategic advisor, which is really, really exciting for me. And as a part of that, really the best part probably is that, unlike so many other leaders, I had the opportunity to choose who takes this mission forward with Disability Solutions. And when Keith Meadows, my longtime number two, agreed to step into the role as the executive director, I could not have been more thrilled. Keith is so dedicated to the work. He's so dedicated to the team. Since I stepped into the executive director role almost 7 years ago now, I knew there was no one that could step into this role if I ever chose to go on to my next adventure other than Keith. So I want to thank him and thank the team for the incredible work that they've done to support me through my transition, and then kind of leaving my baby. And, with that, I do also just want to take a couple of minutes to talk about why I chose to leave now, and kind of address any perceptions or optics due to the timing. So I decided that it was time for me to move away from Disability Solutions full time about 9 months ago. And really, the planning process started at that point. And it is purely because I am in a different place in my life. Our kids are grown. Chad and I, if you know us personally, know that we travel all the time. And what I wanted to do is be able to take full advantage of that, grow into our own business that's been around Catch 22 for the last 12 years, and really step into a full-time CEO role there, as well as with our acquisition of the job board doctor, for me to spread my wings into some other areas of talent acquisition where I can make an impact, as well as just kind of provide me the work-life balance that I was looking for. I think it's important for everyone to know that this was not a post-election decision. This was not a post 11246 revocation decision. It's bad timing, but it was all timing that has started for me well into early 2024. And I want you guys to know that even though I'm not in the ED role anymore, I'm still going to be doing this amazing podcast. And we are so excited about the new guests that we're going to bring on this year, and some returning guests who we're going to have great conversations with. But we're going to really ramp it up in 2025. We need to hear more disabled voices in our community. We need to hear the incredible work that we are all continuing to do when it's not so easy, when it gets dramatically harder. And we've been through a lot in my 15 years, and we've seen some great progress. And like I always say, this is a lifetime's worth of work. So we're going to see ebbs and flows on our progress. And what is so exciting is that when times get harder, we see who really is in our corner. We see who's committed to the work, and we see who is just performative in the work. And we rally those people next to us. We rally those people and we bring them in, because we get to continue to do this great work. We get to continue to do this good trouble, so to speak. And with that, I want to introduce this week's guest. Grant Harris, who's coming onto the show. Grant is the CEO and founder of, excuse me, GTH Consulting. He's a neurodiversity champion. He is an autistic author, not one, not two, but 3 times. He's a DEIA practitioner, board member, and he helps move organizations from compliance to community, a mission that is very aligned with what we do at Disability Solutions, which is changing minds and changing lives, the name of this podcast. And Grant is helping companies and leaders understand that we need to move from the now gone stick to understanding the real value and just incredible talent that people with disabilities bring into the workforce and into our lives. And he also, and I want to talk about this a little bit later, and then I'm going to let Grant do his introduction. He also has a peer group that is focused on helping Black neurodistinct professionals maximize manhood in their workplace. I love that title, and I want to talk a little bit more about what that means. But first, let me stop talking and welcome the most important person in this session to the podcast. Grant, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Julie. All I can say to that commentary is wow. I appreciate you and your continued effort over the years. Transition is always hard. Change management is never easy. But I appreciate the opportunity to come here to speak with you and address your audience. It's very humbling because of the things that you've been able to accomplish and the things that you will be accomplishing in your future. So thank you for allowing me to be here for a few minutes.
Yeah, I'm absolutely honored to have you on the show. I've been following you on LinkedIn for, I would say, at least a couple of years, maybe a little bit longer. And I was so excited when Ashley was able to get you to agree to come on the show. First, for our listeners who don't know you, guests who don't, or watchers who don't know you, tell me, who is Grant Harris? How did you get into this work? And just sort of, I'll say your blue sky bio, some personal things about you as well.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Grant Harris. I am founder of GTH Consulting, which is a management consulting operation that offers customized organizational development, human capital management, and cultural transformation to both public and private clients over the years. Ultimately, as you mentioned before, my goal is to help individuals and institutions achieve a new level of organizational excellence and to move from what I call compliance to community. That is my tagline, and compliance is a fixed mindset. Things happen because they've always been that way. The traditionalist way of thinking, the linear way of thinking and being and doing, and move to community, which is a set of behaviors. And those behaviors start with an internal realization and recognition of who you are and where you are as a leader and as an employee in the workplace. And through a transition to understanding that the work that people do is not in vain, and the work that disabled people and specifically neurodivergent people bring to the workplace is valuable and honorable, just like any other part of work. So I help people understand these concepts and break them down and give action steps and then support them through that journey because it is a journey and none of us are at the end of our journey. You are one place and I'm in another, but we're all on that path. So that's from the corporate level, but from a personal perspective, I happen to be a person with a disability. I was diagnosed autistic coming up on 3 years ago. And I have my wife to thank for that. You mentioned like who might be in my life that I could point to say, well, this person certainly had an effect on me. Obviously, my wife has an effect on me, but I probably wouldn't be aware of my autism if it hadn't been for her. And she sent me a listicle one day of 10 things about your spouse or your significant other that might be autistic, and I resonated with like 8 of them kind of right away. So I was like, wow, this might be me. And at that time, I had taught autistic kids as a special educator. I had been around neurodiversity, hadn't studied it, hadn't looked at myself as disabled or neurodistinct in any way, shape, or form. But thanks to that interaction, that spurred knowledge about myself, and understanding of who I am and where I am on my journey, and the work that I do. So that's a bit of the background. I'm the first and only person in my family to be diagnosed with a disability, and specifically with autism, that I'm aware of. So it's a bit isolating. My wife is ADHD. My oldest daughter has some executive functioning challenges. So it's not new within my household. My wife is long time medicated, and we can talk about the ins and outs and the differences of an autistic person being married to an ADHD person. Um, and it's a fun time. But yeah, that's a little bit about me in terms of from the corporate perspective, and also from the personal perspective. But very much looking forward to digging deeper on any of those topics.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And I didn't know that you were only diagnosed 3 years ago. So tell me how, and if I overstep any place, just tell me to go fly a kite. I'm not easily offended. How has that this 3 years of processing been for you in terms of, I would say, recognizing in yourself certain behaviors that are related to your autism, and how you um, found that information to be useful in how you function and move in the world. And I would be interested as a wife with ADHD and some other anxiety disabilities, about a little bit more about that interaction with your wife. I think my husband, who is not autistic, could probably use your notes anyway.
Yeah. So at that point in time of my life, my I did not grow up with an understanding of disability. It wasn't a thing in my household. My parents didn't talk about it. None of us were visually disabled in any way, shape, or form. From that perspective, we were all able-bodied, but again, that's the external and what you can see. I had no idea about the internal. So I was late diagnosed, and as you know, and maybe most of your audience will know, in this country, in the US, most people are diagnosed with autism by the age of 6. And that was not the case for me. I was a grown man. I had a life of experiences and a life of masking, which I did not know that I was masking. And my wife and I were having communication struggles at the time, as a husband and wife do, but it was like deeper than just the surface level, deeper than just the daily grind. So we had to dig deeper and look at things. And my wife had an inclination, and like I said, she sent me the text. And at that point, I had a recognition. I have always been open to like going to the doctor and being healthy from that perspective. I never had a bias against learning more about myself from a medical perspective. So I said, okay, well, let's get tested. I was all for that. I had taught autistic kids. I had been around kids with IEPs, and I'm sure that helped with that awareness and recognition. But I was very interested to learn more about myself, which goes to some of my autistic nature. I am a lifelong learner, and my brain, according to everything that everyone tells me anecdotally, and according to my medical diagnosis, my brain absorbs information faster than the average bear. So my brain is always computing, and I'm always thinking about my thinking, and it literally feels like a sponge. Teddy Roosevelt, great president. If you're not familiar, he was a hard charger, moving forward all the time. He literally said if he wasn't moving forward, if he wasn't accomplishing, he felt like he was going to die because his heart was just always like beating out of his chest. Just go, 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 just doing something. And that's how my brain kind of operates. I'm always looking for the next bit of information. I taught myself how to speed read. I listen to videos. Playback speed is sped up because my brain listens faster than most people speak. When I watch Jeopardy, which is one of my favorite shows, I answer the question before it's finished being read because I'm moving faster and I'm absorbing information. And as soon as I get something in, which is great, I'm like ready for the next thing. And while that's a blessing, it's also a curse because I feel like that I'm always looking for the next thing. I'm always seeking the next thing. My brain is like, always feed me more. And I have to kind of tamper that and say, okay, I get it. And find ways, both anecdotally and both directly, to alleviate that sometimes. So that's part of how my autism shows up. That is helpful in terms of helping other people, because other people either feel the same way or they're nonlinear in terms of how they see information and how they absorb it. And that's a differentiator that I have used to be quote unquote successful in life. I didn't know that up until a couple of years ago. So I spent the first year recognizing and coming to um, a realization of being a disabled person. I was always good with the label of autism because, again, I taught autistic kids. I never saw it as a bad thing. I still don't. I think it's pretty cool. I wear it on my sleeve. I'm proud about it. I'm here talking to you about it. I do lots of these interviews and conversations. However, the biggest thing that I still struggle with, because my as much as there is positive about my particular way that autism shows up for me, it's also difficult. I am very routine based, and it's difficult sometimes for me to accept changes in the schedule and unknown things that I can't see coming and these types of things. And now that I have a better awareness, I react to them differently. But for a very long time, it was a poor reaction based on other people's feedback. So the biggest thing that I struggle with now is not being autistic or not transitioning from conversations or not having difficulty in social environments and not really wanting to be around people. Um, those are difficult, but that's not the biggest thing for me. The biggest thing for me is that my wife, who's ADHD and also disabled from that perspective, she can take a pill and she can look better and feel better and act better and do better and quote unquote be better. She can be a not a different person, but an enhanced version of herself. She gets that support. I and all of my autistic brothers and sisters, we don't have a magic pill that we can just take and swallow, and all of a sudden we're better with transitions, or all of a sudden I can shut my brain off, or all of a sudden I am not routine based and don't need timers and notifications to do things on a set schedule. That doesn't happen for us. So we just have to work, and I have to work at my communication. I have to find different ways and means that the way that I operate can be acceptable to others around me. And then when it fails, I just have to try again and try a different way. Not saying that people with ADHD don't, of course, because they're people and they're humans, but they have the option to be medicated, which my wife has taken that option, and they have that support system, which I do not. So that's uh, the biggest obstacle that I still battle with mentally is that I just have to work on myself and through myself without a medical support from that perspective that clearly helps other people with their type of neurodistinction.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's just given me so much to think about. So thank you for that. And again, thank you for the transparency. And to your point, I was late diagnosed ADHD, and it saved my life, and it dramatically changed my life because I didn't understand what was wrong until I got that diagnosis. And I didn't have any idea how to control what was happening in my brain. And I do take medication, and if I went off medication, when I have in the past, it's not been a pretty day. And so I think that you make a really good point that is often overlooked. We all have our own journey with disability, whatever our disability is, but it's so helpful, I think, for our listeners to understand that while you recognize and appreciate that your wife's brain also functions differently, um, and that can be both good and bad, that your journey is much different than hers just because we're both neurodiverse, neurodistinct. That journey is still very different from your perspective versus her perspective, and I would say, even my perspective, because we are all living individual lives.
Yes. And I would say a couple of things. I know we're just meeting for the first time and having this conversation, but we're real. And I always try to recognize my own bias. And I used words and phrases like blessing and a curse. You use words and phrases like good and bad, and that something was wrong. And we live it and we're here. And I have to catch myself because I spend my time, as you do, helping educate other people about the fact that it's not bad or wrong or it's not a
Yeah.
curse. It just is because, like I like to say, we are all distinct human beings and we all deserve to live a life full of distinction, which is why I identify as being neurodistinct versus neurodivergent. Um, but I have to hold myself to that same standard. So the fact that my brain is always absorbing, I said it was a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing and it's an obstacle sometimes, but it's not a curse. And
Yep.
I heard you say that, it's not a pretty day and you had to find out what was wrong with you. And obviously, nothing was wrong with you. It was just different and non-linear and wasn't traditional.
Mm-hmm.
And these are things that when I hear other people, I can easily pick them up and say, hey, well, let's reframe that conversation. But I have to remind myself to do that.
Yeah.
And so thank you for giving me the opportunity to remind myself. And thank you for being open to that feedback of this is what I heard you say. But from one neurodistinct person to the other, there is certainly, and for all of your listeners who either are undiagnosed because they can't afford it or self-diagnosed because they choose to be, or who are medically diagnosed because they were forced to be, whatever your situation is. Um, you are not cursed. I am not cursed. Julie's not cursed. There's nothing wrong with us. What's wrong is that everyone else thinks that something's wrong with us.
Yeah.
And that's not the case. We just are. And it is a blessing that we operate differently. And sometimes it's hard to see that blessing. Like you mentioned, it's not a pretty day and it's difficult to see the blessing from that. And for me, sometimes it's hard to see like I'm doing all this work internally and I feel like that I've made progress, but then people around me are still like, oh, you're still doing the same thing you were 3 years ago or 10 years ago before I knew.
Yep.
So I just wanted to bring that up because I talk about bias in my day to day, but none of us are immune from it. Bias in of itself is not bad, but not recognizing it, not being aware of it, and then not expressing it and moving to the left or right of it, that's the bad part. So forgive me for digressing, but just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent point. And it's, before we started recording, I asked you, like, if I say something that you don't like or something that you want to reframe, do it. And that's why we want to have these conversations. And it's true that people who have brains that function differently, whether that's mental illness, neurodiversity, neurodistinction, kind of wherever you sort of sit in that spectrum, are more ashamed of their disability than people with physical disabilities and very apparent disabilities, because we've been taught that you can go to the doctor, going back to your earlier point, you can go to the doctor and you can fix a broken leg or a strained muscle or XYZ. And we were
Yes.
taught as children, I know I'm a little bit more senior than you are, but we were taught, and especially growing up in a very religious house, that I needed to just sort of pull myself out of the gutter, ask Jesus to help me, and be
Yes.
better. And I was taught that there was something wrong with me. And I, even after all of these years of work and knowing that I've been a person who's lived with a disability for since my early 20s, maybe my late teens, still fall back into those habits of my own bias about what I should be able to do
Mm.
to fix myself, rather than to recognize that this is something that is neurologically different, and there are most certainly blessings, and things that are, especially on the business side, that make me really really good at what I do and make
Mhm.
you really good at what you do. But we still beat ourselves up over the quote unquote bad days or the
Mm.
feelings of bad. And I want to say just thank you for that, because I needed that today. I
Mm.
needed that reminder, and it's going to be great listening for other people in our world who don't have the same privileges that we do, to be able to speak about who we are, to remind them of that.
Yes, certainly, and that reminds me of, and you mentioned, doing the work ourselves and trying to change ourselves and be quote unquote better. I want to recognize, and I have to her directly, my wife, my family, um, my nuclear family growing up. They weren't fully understanding of me being autistic. They labeled it other things. They thought it was attributed to other experiences in my life. Um, they're much more understanding now. My wife just thought that I was an ass. She thought I was an asshole. And she thought that I was better than other people because in social situations I was the quiet one and I was standoffish. And um, in American culture, you say, "Oh, always got to watch out for the quiet ones." And I question all of those, idioms and traditional thoughts in American culture. Like, why do you have to watch out for the quiet ones? I'm watching out for everybody else that's loud and brash and all of that. But inherently, we're taught that the quiet ones are hiding something, or that they're nefarious, or that you got to watch out for them because you can't read them. And I'm like, no, I just don't feel like fighting for space in this room of a lot of people. Um, and then, therefore, I'm the one that looks like I'm arrogant. Um, the fact that I absorb so much information, my family makes fun of me for it now. I used to have these things called interesting facts, um, because I like to tell people that I know a lot, excuse me, I know a little about a lot. I certainly do not know everything, but I know a little about a lot. And that's because I'm always reading something, listening to something, absorbing something in my brain, watching Jeopardy, these kind of things. And then when something happens in a day, I'm like, oh, Julie, I got an interesting fact about that, and an interesting fact. And people got tired of hearing my interesting facts because it made them feel that somehow I was superior or they were inferior. And I just thought that I was sharing knowledge and be like, hey, I know this and you should know this too.
Yeah, it's an
So these
interesting
are,
fact.
yeah, these are the quirks. And now that's a case in point of me adjusting because I'm grown and I see much more gray now. It used to be very black or white for me for most of my life. Marriage and three kids and all that will build gray in your life. Um, but now instead of like interesting facts, I say, well, did you know? And it's the same kind of concept that I'm sharing this information that I find interesting, but I'm doing it in a different way that's more digestible to the people who love me. So that's an example of not changing who I am because of my autism, but adjusting and making a simple adjustment. And we talk about simple adjustments in the workplace all the time. Simple from an accommodation standpoint. You can have formal accommodations or you can have simple adjustments. And in life, it's the same thing. Simple adjustment. I'm not withholding the fact that I have this information and I want to share it with you because I love you and I think you should know. But I'm adjusting the way that I give it so that it's more digestible to you. Fortunately, I'm able to do that because I have low support needs. Unfortunately, for those of us who have higher support needs, they are maybe not able to make that adjustment. And then it's up to others around them to have that empathy, not sympathy, because no disabled person wants to be felt sorry for, but have the empathy. Say, okay, well, they may not have the capacity to do this at this point in time in life, at this point in time in their career, but they can do this, and let me meet them halfway. And I don't see that a lot in the workplace. In the workplace, it's the disabled person has to meet the standard 100% of the way, and the standard and the tradition and the leader or the hiring manager or the supervisor doesn't meet them halfway. And unbeknownst to that leader, supervisor, manager, they are probably neurodistinct themselves because upwards of 40% of the workplace is neurodistinct that identifies as such and that is aware as such. So this plays across both fences from a life and at home perspective and also in the workplace. I spend much of my work talking about the workplace, but we leave that workplace and we go home, and we leave home and we go to that workplace, and it intersects. All of that intersects. So I'm rambling, but I appreciate you taking us down that path.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you have actually led me down the correct path because I would love to just talk to you about personal things all day. That's like, we get such candor in some of our guests, and I really really appreciate that. But I do want to know more about what you do at GTH and how you roll your lived experience and the lived experiences of others in your neurodistinct sphere into the work that you do to help with workforce development, optimization, all of those things that are talent acquisition buzzwords that we're all very excited about and we all want to do as good leaders. How does that impact what you do at GTH, and how do you help companies recognize what they need to do in workforce development, how they get to optimization, and how that also includes talent with disabilities?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So many things. It's all about education and learning. And as the late great Maya Angelou used to say, when you know better, then you can do better. So my approach is holistic from the standpoint of I don't tell organizational leaders that they're doing something wrong. I help organizational leaders through the RACE framework that I created. RACE is an acronym, RACE. I help them understand who they are and where they are on that journey. I help them to acknowledge their intent and their impact. I help them to cultivate tools and resources, and I help them engage in that work. And this is a cyclical process. So recognition, recognize, acknowledge, cultivate, and engage. So this is what we talk about. These are things that we do. So looking at their policies, practices, and their procedures, not only from a 30,000-foot level, but also from a granular level to understand how they can be more neuro inclusive. So it's not about let's throw out everything that you're doing. It's more about let's refine what you're doing, and then let me introduce you to something you may not be doing in order to do two things. One, uh, be more neuro inclusive for the workforce that you have now, because like I mentioned before, 30 to 40% of the workforce identifies as neurodistinct. However, 70, 60 to 70% of that percentage feels like that they are discriminated against, they are afraid to disclose, they have a negative stigma within that workplace, and that's a significant portion. So helping organizations understand that the more neuro inclusive, that their workplace is, because neurodiversity touches all of us, what I like to call from the boardroom to the mailroom. So there's a thought that because I'm not autistic as a person, I'm not autistic, dyslexic, and I don't have ADHD, that then therefore I don't need to care about neurodiversity because it's not me. One, there are dozens of different forms of neurodivergence, not just the most common three that we hear about. And two, everyone is neurodiverse because we all have a brain that operates differently. There's this neurotypical, and this is part of the education, and I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but it's part of the education between neurodiverse, neurotypical, neurodivergent, neurodistinction. What do those things mean? How do we define them? And then how do they operate within the workplace? How do we capitalize on all of the blessings that these folks bring to the workplace? And then how do we minimize the challenges that we see in the workplace? I always work from two perspectives. One is a human capital and the other is a financial capital. What's the human capital impact? What's the human capital intent and impact in these policies, practices, and procedures? And what's the financial impact? Because at the end of the day, my job is to help organizations make money, save money, and achieve their organizational goals. And that's where we get that organizational excellence. Excellence is going to look different from company A to company B. But what does that look like, and help define that from a human capital and a financial capital perspective?
Yeah,
So
and
I
I,
bring this structure to the organization and ultimately help them understand the business value of neurodiversity in the workplace, from the boardroom to the mailroom. That means the CEO to the intern and everyone in between.
yeah, and I want to just reiterate something you said that I think is so important as disability leaders and disability consultants. A lot of times we still are very reliant on charitable notions as well as compliance notions, and you used business language that is
Mm,
meaningful to the C suite: financial capital, human capital. And as our industry and our community continue to mature and become more sophisticated, what we need is that kind of conversation, that kind of language that integrates: how does this help the business? How does this work with the business in a context that business leaders are comfortable with and see the value in? And I think you just stated that so perfectly. And I want to just move on to one other thing I wanted to talk to you about that I think is so interesting. So you have a neurodivergent peer group, and it's called Maximizing Manhood as Black Neurodistinct Professionals. Tell me how that came to be, and tell me how important it is for Black men who are also have disabilities, in this case neurodiversity, neurodistinction, um, to have each other and to have that resource group to support them as they are on their professional journey.
Thank you for asking. So the roundabout story of how I came to this platform. So my wife runs an in-home daycare, and we have lots of toddlers running around all the time, so it's always loud. Actually, one of the moms knew that I was in this work, and she suggested to my wife and said, "Hey, Grant might be interested in this platform called Forum," and I had never heard of it before. So my introduction to Forum, which is the platform that I use to host this group, was actually from one of the moms in my wife's business. So that's how life works. So after being introduced to the platform, having several conversations with their team, understanding more about who they are and what they do, I thought it was an opportunity to expand my reach and to hold myself true to building community. So it's a small but mighty community of Black men, and the reason that I focus on Black men is twofold. One, I could say I could focus on all neurodivergent people, but that's basically everybody in some way, shape, or form, and that's not specific enough. So, what are the qualities that I am aware of? What's my lived experience? What's the professional experience that I could bring? And then, so I could build a community where people feel psychologically safe to talk about what they want to talk about, how they want to talk about it, when they want to talk about it. And then it will not be just um, you won't be patronized and say, "Oh, I'm so sorry that's happening to you." You'll be like, "Yeah, I went through that yesterday, and that's how I dealt with it. So maybe we could work on this together." So that's how it came about. It's a small but mighty group. There are folks from pinpointing all over the globe, from islands to large countries to small cities. And it's just getting started. And I have no idea where it's going to go, where it's going to be. But it is about maximizing manhood because being a black man, I identify as a black cisgender heterosexual man in America. Um, is difficult. Always has been, always will be. It's not as hard as maybe it was in Reconstruction era and Jim Crow era, but the difficulties are different now. They just have morphed. So on top of that, add on having disability, a non-apparent disability, and having all the stigma of black men are aggressive. Black men, most of them can't speak the King's English properly. And if they do, then they're an exception. And if you get a black man that's doing what he quote unquote should be doing, then he's exceptional versus that's just a standard anyway. So then you add in the fact of my sometimes lack of eye contact, or the fact that in extended conversations I prefer to be off camera because that energizes me, and being on camera saps my energy. But you can't see my face, so then therefore you're uncomfortable, and I have to acquiesce to your comfort level instead of meeting me halfway, kind of deal. So when you throw all of these things together in the corporate space and then trying to climb the ladder, I've never been promoted. I don't blame never being promoted on being autistic or being black. It's not an excuse. But there are many black men who either have not been promoted at all or they have skyrocketed through promotion. And like, well, where's the delta? Why are these folks not getting that at all? And then why are you getting skyrocketed from like day one and you go exactly to the top? Where's the difference in that? And then the folks that are left at the bottom, how are they handling that and how are they moving? And the folks that skyrocketed to the top, were they really ready for that? Or if they are ready for that, then how do they stay there? And if they're not ready for that, how do they deal with everything and all of the stress and the trauma and the grief that happens from leaving their people behind or being isolated because you're the only one in the room or the only one at the table, which I have been. I've either been the only person of color in the room, the youngest in the room, the only that's out and loud and proud about being neurodistinct in any way, shape, or form, sometimes all three at the same time. That's extremely isolating. So having a community that they can regularly come to, regularly meet with, give tools and resources and access to things that they may not have had before from someone that looks like them, sounds like them, has had any similar experiences they have, although that is a minute population, I think is very powerful.
Amazing. I don't need to add anything to that because it was just so beautifully stated. So this has been a fantastic conversation, Grant. I thank you so much for coming on. We always wrap up with two questions. The first, and I think I know the answer to this one, but I'll give you the space to do it. Who is someone in your life that helped change your life related to your diagnosis as autistic?
Yeah, I think you might know that's an easy one. That's my wife. I really don't know. I really don't know if I would be diagnosed. I really don't know if I would be aware of my autism. I really don't know if I would have the opportunity to use all of the traits that are innate to me, if it hadn't been for that negative time in life, but the positivity of my wife saying, "Hey, this might be you, this might be us. Let's take a look at it." Obviously, there are other people, but I probably would not be here having this conversation with you if it were not for my wife.
Amazing partners change our lives. So what about for changing the mind of a business leader about the talent, let's say that a black neurodistinct person brings to the table?
Yeah, so I'm not in the business, Julie, of convincing or changing minds. If someone has been told for their entire life from everyone that they care about, their parents, their uncle, their grandfather, their best friend, that the sky is purple, there's nothing that I can do coming to meet them day one to change their mind that the sky is blue. So that's not my goal. Convincing and changing minds is not my goal, and I know that's the the
It's
title of
mine.
yeah. So what I prefer to do is, because it's very difficult to do that from how I look versus how you look in the spaces and places that I run in. So if I can get people to the point where they think themselves on their own that the sky might be any other color other than purple, because they are aware that there are other colors. They're just convinced that the sky is purple, but they know there's red, there's blue, they know there's other colors. So if I can get them to the point to think that the sky might be a different color, then that's where my work begins. Not to say, okay, well, yeah, yesterday you thought it was purple, and today you know that it's blue just because I say so. That's not going to happen. That's not happened in my career. What has happened is through conversation, through questioning, through leading down a path of maybe I didn't think about it that way, being curious. People get to a point where, oh, well, it might be a different way, and that's when learning is unlocked. That's when I can come in and say, okay, well, if that might be a different way, what about this over here? And what about this over here? And how can we change that? And here, I'm going to help you along that way. So that's really my approach. And it's a longer approach, but I think at the end of the day, it's a deeper and more rooted approach leading to community, because behavior change is the goal, not necessarily mindset change. And in my experience, if you change the behaviors first, then the mindset comes. Because if I say I want to read a book every day and I don't read it all today, I'm not going to start reading that book tomorrow. Just from a mindset perspective, willpower is not that strong. However, if I say I want to read a book and I put a book in the places and spaces that I routinely visit daily, and I do that act, and I say, oh, that book is there, then I might pick up that book. And then the next day I'll pick it up. I might not read it, but I'll put it down in the same spot. The next day I'll pick it up and I'll read the first page. It's the behavior change. And then now, after that behavior is changed, now you become a reader when before you weren't a reader at all. So that's my approach to the work that I do.
I excuse me, I absolutely love it. So if our listeners want to connect with you, whether it's for just a personal connection, a business connection, potential consulting, how do they find you?
Yeah, my only social media platform, because I can only handle one at a time. I'm only on LinkedIn. There are a few Grant Harrises on LinkedIn. But if you look up Grant Harris and GTH Consulting, you'll find me. It'll be in the show notes as well. Grant at compliance2community.com is the email. Grant at compliance2community.com. And I'll be sure I use a link tree, which, if you're not familiar with Linktree, it's a website for websites. So all of my writing, all of my books, all of my frameworks are in one place. So people can come back to that one place, and you'll find that on my LinkedIn page. And I'll be sure that you have that for your show notes as well.
Amazing. Grant Harris, thank you so much for joining us. Keep up the incredible work, and I love hearing your voice, and I'm sure that we will talk some more. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, guys. Lots more to come in 2025. We are so excited to keep changing minds and changing lives with you guys.